Hey y'all, we're going to finish the notes from yesterday and then go into the notes for today, which is going to be the remaining part of bone tissue. And we're going to look at the parts of bone tissue that are non-cellular, and then we will do the structure of a long bone and the structure of compact bone. So if we go to the other side of your long sheet, we've got to talk about the matrix of bone. And if we go back to connective tissue, the matrix was everything that was non-cellular. It was composed of a ground substance and any kind of fiber that would be found in that ground substance that would hold the cells in place or give that connective tissue or tissue in general the structure and stability that it has. The matrix of bone tissue is composed of inorganic salts and organic matrix. So this is going to be comparing the organic part of bone versus the non-organic or inorganic part of bone. If the let's start with this side. The organic matrix of bone is going to be your fibers and your ground substance. The fibers found within bone are collagenous fibers, which would make sense because bone has to be so strong. Then you have to have the strongest type of fiber, which are collagenous fibers. Remember, those are bundled and twisted for good tensile strength. The ground substance of bone is going to be composed of proteins and polysaccharides, which are your really big sugars. And two examples of those are glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate. And the purpose of these two components of your ground substance in bone is to repair and maintain bone and cartilage. So if you look at this picture here, this is a picture of degenerative osteoarthritis, which is where the bones tend to break down in the joint region, and the end of the bone is going to become inflamed, therefore you have arthritis. And taking a glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate supplement over the counter can often help with joint health and can often help with some of the symptoms where the cartilage is going to be worn away on the ends of the bones and you get this grinding sensation in the joint. Remember, the purpose of that hyaline cartilage on the ends of bones is to create this frictionless environment so bones can move freely against one another. But if those start to wear down, either due to overuse or due to age, then it can be painful. And if you take glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate over the counter, it can help. But the natural and innate purpose of those is to repair and maintain the bone and cartilage. All right, if we look at the inorganic salty component of bone, you have hydroxyapatite crystals, and those are made by calcium phosphate. Yesterday we talked about the activity of osteoblast and osteoclast and how the osteoblasts are going to build or deposit that calcium into the bony matrix when there is an excess of blood calcium. And the form of that calcium in bone is calcium phosphate, and those are laid down by the osteoblasts. They have a crystalline structure to them, which is where you get this name, hydroxyapatite crystals. You don't really need to know any more about that other than the purpose, again, of that calcium, or the purpose, again, of that osteoblast is to lay down and deposit calcium within that bone when we have an excess in the body. The inorganic salts of the bone can also be made of magnesium, sodium, potassium, carbonate, and these are going to mix in with that calcium phosphate in the bony matrix, but the one that we're going to focus on mostly is calcium phosphate because of the activity of osteoblast and osteoclast. If there was a deficit of blood calcium levels, those osteoclasts would then kick into action based on parathyroid hormone, and they would break down bony matrix in order to bring blood calcium levels to their appropriate level. All right, so that finishes up the notes from yesterday. Let's go to the notes for today, which are on long bone structure. Get back to it here. And the structure of compact bone. All right, so looking at this picture here, this is the structure of all long bones. Okay, and if we go back to comparing the classifications of bones by shape, long bones are longer than they are wide. They don't have to necessarily be long in length. They are just longer than they are wide. They will generally have two enlarged ends to them and some kind of thin or skinny middle. The long bones of your body include your arm bones, except your carpals. So it would include your humerus, your radius, your ulna, your metacarpals, and your phalanges. And then it would include your femur, tibia, fibula, metatarsals, and phalanges. It does not, again, does not include carpals, the patella, or the tarsals. Those are all short bones, and specifically that patella is a sesamoid bone because it is encased in tendon. Now, when we look at long bones, no matter which one we're looking at in the body, they're going to follow this general pattern and this general structure. The ends of the bones are going to be called epiphyses. One epiphysis, more than one epiphyses. There's two ends to a bone. One that's going to be closer to the point of attachment, one that's going to be further away. The one that is closer to the point of attachment is your proximal epiphysis. The one that is further away from your point of attachment is going to be your distal epiphysis. Epiphysis just means end of bone, enlarged end. Think enlarged starts with an E, end starts with an E, epiphysis starts with an E. The middle or shaft of the bone is going to be your diaphysis. Okay, there is no proximal and distal diaphysis. It's just the diaphysis, the center section of the bone. Each epiphysis is going to be covered in an articular cartilage. Articular means it has to do something with a joint. An articulation is a joint. Bones articulate with each other. Articular is just an adjective to describe the cartilage, to describe the location of the cartilage. Articular cartilage is joint cartilage. The type of cartilage is going to be hyaline. Okay, I don't want you to tell me that it's hyaline cartilage. I want you to tell me that it is articular cartilage. But you need to know it is made of hyaline cartilage. It's not fibrocartilage. It's not elastic cartilage. It is hyaline, but the specific name for it at the end of a long bone is articular cartilage. And it will only be found where the bones articulate. There's no need to cover the whole bone in articular cartilage because no other bone is going to come in contact with the center section of this bone that you see here. It's only going to make a connection or an articulation with the ends of the bone. This distal epiphysis would also be covered in this articular cartilage, and it would just be right here where bones are going to articulate together. The epiphyses of bone are going to be composed of spongy or cancellous bone. Spongy bone is spongy. Now, it is not smushy spongy, but it is hard and is composed of holes that make it appear spongy. I will probably call it spongy bone because that's what I am most familiar with, but it can also be called cancellous bone. The areas of spongy bone are going to be separated from one another by an epiphyseal line. And that epiphyseal line starts out as an epiphyseal plate, sometimes called a growth plate. And the epiphyseal line will be how your bones get longer in length as you age. If we were to x-ray all of the students, you could probably see your epiphyseal plates in some of your bones. If you x-rayed mine, they would be gone because I'm done growing at this point. As you age, the epiphyseal growth plate or epiphyseal plate will fuse and become just a very tiny epiphyseal line. At the kind of border of this epiphyseal line, you will have red marrow. Okay, red marrow is hematopoietic, okay, meaning that it can make blood cells. So that process, again, is called hematopoiesis. If I turn that into an adjective, red marrow is hematopoietic. It can do hematopoiesis, which is the production of blood cells. The opposite of spongy bone is compact bone. And compact bone is also called lamellar bone. We'll look at the individual structure of that in just a second and why it's called lamellar bone. Long story short, it's made of a bunch of lamellas or lamellae, which are small plates, and we'll go into more detail in a second. But compact bone is going to kind of cover the outside of a bone as well as kind of surround the edges of this epiphysis. The spongy bone is going to have a thin section of compact bone around it. In every long bone, there's going to be this hollowed out cavity. Remember, cavity means space or hole in the body. And inside of every long bone, there is a medullary cavity. And inside of that medullary cavity, you will have an endosteum. Okay, endo means in, ost is bone. So this is a membrane that is going to surround the inside of the bone. It'll actually kind of spread up into the spongy bone and fill every hole of that sponge as well. The name for the cavity, the hole down the center, is the medullary cavity. It is lined with endosteum. Laying on top of that endosteum is going to be yellow marrow. Yellow marrow is yellow because it is composed of adipose tissue. It is fatty, it is greasy, it's yucky whenever we do our dissection because it gets stuck on everything. But yellow marrow is bone marrow that is more fatty, and it is composed of that adipose tissue, as opposed to red marrow, which is more reticular connective tissue and is hematopoietic. Surrounding the outside of the bone, on the surface of the compact bone, is going to be periosteum. Peri means around, ost means bone. So periosteum will surround the outside of the bone. It is stuck to the compact bone. So if we look at this image here, 12 is periosteum. Right under that would be compact bone. The front portion of this bone has been removed so that you can see the inside. But this is compact bone, this very tiny strip here. And then this outer lining on the compact bone would be periosteum. So we would almost line this periosteum all the way up, and it would stop when we get to hyaline cartilage. Okay, it'll weave itself right into hyaline cartilage where those bones come together, or it'll weave itself right into that articular cartilage where those bones come together. The periosteum is very vascular. Okay, it is bloody. It is composed of blood vessels. And those blood vessels are going to create this network of blood vessels that will get into the bone. So there's got to be a way to supply that bone, hard bone, with blood and oxygen and nutrients. And so the periosteum is vascular, and it's going to spiderweb itself to the compact bone. Those blood vessels will travel inside the compact bone, up through the spongy bone, and really perfuse that bone with the blood that it needs and the blood vessels that it needs. This periosteum is also going to weave itself into a tendon or a ligament, and so it's all interconnected. The periosteum blends itself into a tendon, which then blends itself into a muscle. If we're attaching, let's say our heel bone to our Achilles tendon and then to our calf muscle. If we're attaching two bones together, we're attaching femur and tibia, Okay, then we would blend ourselves from the periosteum of that bone into the MCL and then into the tibia, the periosteum of the tibia. So everything is very close together. The arches that create spongy bone are individually called a trabecula. Trabeculae is going to be the plural version of that. And if I were to draw one arch of spongy bone, I have drawn one trabecula. Okay, and I'm going to buddy that up with another arch, and that's going to create this space. Okay, this space in between the archwork of spongy bone. Inside that space is going to be endosteum, it's going to be blood vessels, could be a little bit of red marrow, depending on where we are in the bone. But each individual arch is called a trabecula, and you put them together to create the wholly spongy appearance of bone. All right, now what we're going to do is just take a small section of compact bone. So I'm going to zoom in to just like a little rectangle here of just this compact bone. We'll get to spongy bone later. There's really not a whole lot to learn about it. But if we take just a rectangle here of compact bone, what you're looking at is in an outer section, okay, and this is our covering on the outside of compact bone. So this has to be our periosteum, and that periosteum is vascular, meaning that it contains blood vessels. Those blood vessels are going to push and really move their way through all of these interconnections in this compact bone to get to the center, to get to this medullary cavity. Compact bone is going to kind of surround the perimeter of the bone, and then you will have spongy bone in the center. And that spongy bone is composed of individual trabecula or trabeculae if we're looking at more than one. So each one of these arches is a trabecula, and if you put them together, you create this appearance of spongy bone. Okay, so we're just taking a cross section of the diaphysis of the bone, meaning that we're in the center section of that bone. What we're going to do now is only focus on the compact bone. And when we look at compact bone, it's kind of complex. Okay, there's a lot of organized pattern, or there is an organized patterned layout of compact bone. When we looked at a histology slide of bone, we said it looks like tree trunks, okay, and it did. But what are those tree trunks? Well, how do we make a tree trunk? How do tree trunks connect to one another? And then how are the osteocytes connecting to one another? And so what we're going to do now is really identify the different parts in more detail of that image that you can kind of see in your head from the histology unit. All right, so let's start with just the cell. Okay, we know that much. We know that osteocytes are going to make up your bone tissue, okay, and they have to be in their lacuna. Okay, so each individual black dot you see here is an osteocyte. Osteocytes live in their home, live in their chamber, their crib, called a lacuna. Those osteocytes will organize themselves in these circular rings. Okay, a complete set of circular rings is called an osteon. Okay, an osteon can also be called a Haversian system. Okay, when we looked at bone tissue slides, there was the black hole in the center. Okay, and we said that black hole was a Haversian canal. Okay, and that Haversian canal contained blood vessels and nerves. Okay, which is this right here. This is our blood vessels found within an osteonic or Haversian canal. Those terms are interchangeable. And it is in the center of every single osteon. So this is a complete osteon. got this bracket around it. This is an incomplete osteon because we've chopped it in half in order to see the blood vessels within that osteonic canal or within the center of it. Each osteon is made of rings, and each individual ring is called a concentric lamella if it is one, lamellae if it is more than one. So we take a small concentric lamella, we put a bigger one around that, we put a bigger one around that, we put a bigger one around that. Okay, each one of those is a lamella, a concentric lamella. Con means with, cen means circle. They're circles that are with each other. If we have a complete osteon, then it is composed of a various number of concentric lamellae. Osteons are connected to one another by these incomplete lamellae. Okay, so if I look at this, and we'll draw a circle around it here. If I were to outline one osteon, okay, here's one, here's two, make it a little bit bigger. Here's two. Okay, here's an incomplete one, but it could be about this big if we were to kind of think 3D. Okay, and these three osteons connect to one another by this space filler. Okay, and that is called a interstitial lamella or interstitial lamellae. Okay, inter means between. So the interstitial lamellae run between complete osteons. They fill the space between the osteons. The theory is that as your bones regenerate, as they recycle, as osteoblasts are at work, and as osteoclasts are at work, you may use an osteon and kind of change the shape of it to get more calcium into the blood. And so if it's being broken down, there's going to be remnants or sections of previous osteons that will fill the space between the new osteons or the remaining osteons. And so the interstitial lamellae are going to fill the space between the complete osteons. Now, all osteons, all compact bone, okay, is going to be surrounded by bigger lamellae called circumferential lamellae. And those are going to run the circumference of the bone. They're going to run all the way around the bone in the diaphysis of each long bone. Okay, so each circumferential lamellae would run all the way around this way. Okay, so here it would come on around the bone, meet up with another one, and each lamella is composed of osteocytes. So the osteocytes create the circular shape, and you just change the circular shape by describing the circumference of the bone, describing the osteon made up of concentric lamellae, or filling the space between them with interstitial lamellae. Surrounding the compact bone is going to be periosteum. Okay, so number 8 is the periosteum. The periosteum's on just the outside, right on the outside, superficial, to the circumferential lamellae. Okay, that periosteum is vascular. Here comes a blood vessel, here comes a blood vessel, and we're going to push through the compact bone. We're going to join in with a Haversian canal, which is containing blood vessels. I'm going to come down, come down, come down. I'm going to go perpendicular. Perpendicular blood vessel is going to meet up with the next Haversian canal. Then it might come up here and go more perpendicular and meet up with the next Haversian canal. Okay, this is a network of blood vessels that are going to move through the whole entire circumference, diameter, whole thing of the bone. If it is going perpendicular to the Haversian or osteonic canal, it is called Volkmann's canal. Okay, Volkmann is just the person who figured it out. It can be called a perforating canal. Okay, each vertical canal that you see is a Haversian canal. The horizontal, or the canal that runs perpendicular to the Haversian canal, is going to be the Volkmann's canal. Again, the purpose of that is to really perfuse or spread that blood supply across the entire bone. All right, I think that is all for today. And yep, that finishes it up.